Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Well friends, this will be my last pre-recorded video of 2021 because I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks hanging out with my family. I think some of you might know that my little boy turned 1 in September, so excitingly, we are now getting ready for the first Christmas that he's really going to understand and be able to get a bit more stuck into. Of course, I will be using the time to plan for more interesting, I hope, content for 2022 on this channel. But with that being said, I do think I want to try and figure out how to go live on this channel at some point between Christmas and New Year. I mean, maybe I will even get my wish of hitting 100,000 subscribers in that time and we can celebrate together in the live, because I think that would be really fun. Of course, there are also a bunch of other videos in the old back catalogue in this channel if you do find that you are missing my face and my dulcet tones. Not only that, but, shameless plug time, if you are based in the UK, or if not, but you do have access somehow to 5 on demand, then you can go and check out my very first TV documentary appearance on the catch-up over on 5 on demand. What you're going to need to do is search for Lady Rochford, and if you do, you will find an 1.5 hour long documentary about Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law. It's presented by Tracy Borman, and I do pop up in it on a few occasions. But if that is not enough of me for you, then you can also catch me over on Lauren Learns History. And in fact, make sure you do head over to check out her brand new video that went live yesterday, because I was lucky enough to be invited to take part in filming that. Lauren and I have collaborated before, and I always have just the best time when we team up. This time, we went to the Museum of the Home to look at the history of Christmas for her channel. Lauren's channel is so fab. She just makes this brilliant and super accessible content that's aimed at children, but I would argue is also very enjoyable for grown-ups too. So, with this video, about which more in a moment, and her video that went up, there's going to be the story of Christmases past for all ages to enjoy. Of course, I'll be leaving Lauren's video linked as well as her channel, so you can go and check that out. But in the meantime, we do still have this video, and it is a festive one, because like with Lauren's channel, we are taking a whistle-stop tour through the traditions of Christmases past. I hope you enjoy. In the time before there was a Christmas, and indeed before the spread of Christianity across Europe, and particularly for my purposes in this video, across Britain, there were celebrations intended to mark, or perhaps act as an antidote to, the darkest and shortest days of the year. Midwinter also coincided with a lull in the agricultural calendar. Harvest was over and the cold ground was to be left to rest until it was time to start to work it again. So it was a time for the greenery that remained on evergreen plants to be brought indoors, to decorate the home as a celebration, but also as a reminder that after winter would come spring, and with spring, renewal and new life. Artificial light, be it rushlight, candles, or even logs in the hearth, would brighten the home, and in the case of the fire in the hearth, also warm it up. This connected to the warmth of the sun, something which would soon be a presence in the people's lives for much longer during the day. As might be expected from a very real, historical and contemporary figure, albeit one who has gone and continues to go by many names, be it Father Christmas, Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, etc. This bringer of joy for the darkest days of the year has been doing his magical thing in one form or another since pre-Christian times. Obviously, in pre-Christian times, he didn't go by St. Nicholas. The enduring aspect of this wonderful man's work across the centuries seems to be his ability to travel through the sky. Right, so cover any little ears that might be in the vicinity right now. Done? Good. So, St. Nicholas is where the notion of the gift giving comes in. Nicholas, according to his story, was born in the 3rd century to wealthy parents, but he was orphaned young. Nicholas would become a bishop who was persecuted and imprisoned for his Christian faith. He was also famed for his generosity. He is said to have once ensured that a poor man received enough gold for him to provide the necessary dowries to allow him to marry off his 3 daughters. And it's said that this necessary gold appeared in the house, having been thrown through the window, where it apparently landed in stockings and shoes that had been left by the fire to dry. So I think we can see that as time moves on, the window becomes the chimney, and stockings are still hung there frequently, where they can be filled by the cultural descendant of this early Christian bishop and saint. That's where the Santa chat is going to stop, so any covered ears can now be safely uncovered. During the first centuries of the Christian Church, celebrating or even knowing the date of Jesus Christ's birth seems to almost have been superfluous to requirements. Instead, Easter is the far more significant date for celebration, perhaps understandably, as it is the one that commemorates Christ's death for our sins and his resurrection. In the 4th century, however, the spreading Christian church found it necessary to essentially assert the corporeal humanity of Christ. Additionally, as some would later argue, they may well have wanted to incorporate the pre-existing winter solstice celebrations, whether that be Yuletide, midwinter, Saturnalia, or indeed any other celebration for that matter. And so they sought to find the date of Christ's birth. Now, there is more than one version regarding just how the 25th of December became the date connected to the birth of Christ. There are some who will say that some, frankly, brain-breakingly confusing sums were done to work out that the date of the crucifixion was March 25th in the Roman solar calendar. And 9 months after that is December 25th. So Christ's death and his resurrection map onto the dates of his conception, and thus, it was believed, were used to indicate his date of birth. There is another suggestion, and that's one that early church leaders believed that the world was created on the spring equinox, which perhaps makes sense. It's a time for rebirth and renewal in the natural world, and it also, helpfully perhaps, falls in late March. So, the logical connection they made, apparently, is that God's other creation, or perhaps his conception, that of his son, would also happen at the same time as the spring equinox. The winter solstice occurs 9 months after the spring equinox. And of course, there may well be a number of other versions of this particular journey to date Christ's birth as well. The word Christmas, Christ's Mass, offers us a big hint as to how the day would come to be viewed and potentially celebrated for many centuries. In medieval and early modern England, Christmas was a firm fixture in the liturgical calendar, and it came after a number of days of Advent. Advent began on the 4th Sunday before Christmas, and before you go thinking that you are now being shortchanged with your mere 24 chocolate-filled windows, this version of Advent was much less delicious, because it was a time of penance, reflection and fasting, where Christians awaited the time to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. During Advent, there was also seemingly an expectation for church attendance and praying in general to go up to as much as possible. You were to abstain from meat, dairy, fat, wine, ale, mead, gambling, sex, and even getting married, and no doubt some other things as well. On the one hand, the prohibition on certain foods would have allowed people to maintain their stockpile of delicious nutrients more easily until Christmas Day itself and for the days of celebration that were set aside for after Christmas Day. But I think it must have meant that Advent would have been a pretty bleak time and certainly not very much fun. On a point of order, I haven't found much evidence of there being a dearth of babies being born between late July and early September, which does lead me to surmise that the call to abstain from sex, at least, was one that was most likely ignored. I do think a topic for another video could involve exploring all of the days throughout the year that were set aside for sexual abstinence liturgically in order to show that these particular faith-based requirements must have been ignored as much, if not more, than they were actually obeyed. At midnight, as Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, a Mass would be celebrated. And of course, midnight Mass is still a very popular thing to attend today. Perhaps you go to midnight Mass with your family or your friends. Another Mass was celebrated at daybreak and a third during the day. However, after all of that prescribed austerity from Advent, Christmas Day was a signal of something else entirely, because Christmas Day was the first of 12 days of feasting, merrymaking and game playing, a time when work and study was paused, and one that culminated on the 6th of January, which is Epiphany or Twelfth Night. During this time, homes were still decorated with an assortment of evergreen plants. They were lit with candles, and these homes were kept warm with hearth fires. Another hangover from the pre-Christian midwinter celebration tradition, which continued seemingly unchanged for centuries, was the selection of the Yule log. Apparently, oak was the favourite variety of log in England. This log would need to be pretty big, as it was supposed to burn for the entire 12 days of Yule or 12 days of Christmas. Now, I know of the Yule log today as being something quite different, because it does survive, but I would argue in a more delicious and chocolatey form. Also, for added warmth, there was a particular evergreen decoration that would make its way into homes, and this took the form of a ball, which came to be known as a kissing bough. The kissing bough would include mistletoe, perfect for kissing under. As a side note, William the Conqueror chose Christmas Day 1066 for his English coronation. Now, that coronation does end up being a bit of a kerfuffle. I mean, that's a massive understatement, but I won't talk about that here because I do have a video on that particular Christmas coronation that I will leave linked so you can find out about what happened afterwards. So, those foods that I talked about being prohibited during the fast of Advent were now firmly back on the menu, and they were back on the menu where possible in excess. Depending on your means and what was permitted for you to eat, where sumptuary laws were enforced to legislate on the issue, and on sumptuary laws, if you want to have more information about that, I do talk about them in another video that I will also leave linked. Depending on those factors, your table over those 12 feasting days of Christmas might be adorned with goose, venison, wild boar, beef, partridge, swan, peacock, and it's reported that once cooked, the peacock would be returned to its skin and feathers, including the decorative tail plume, to be served like that as an opulent table display that was also edible. There was cheese, pies, marzipan, which is also called marchpane, and was often decorated and sometimes even gilded. There were custards, tarts, sweetmeats, and all of this would be washed down with wine, mead, and ale. To add to the taste of the food, there were spices like pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and saffron on offer. A surviving staple of the modern British Christmas, the mince pie, would also be doing the rounds. Our versions are circular, but they were originally rectangular as they were intended to represent the crib of the baby Jesus. Mince pies were flavoured with cinnamon, cloves and nutmeg, as a reminder of the gifts given by the three wise men. And although spices and fruit are still very much the order of the day, our mince pies are lacking in the minced meat that they once contained, and from whence they did get their name. And by the way, I am going to be going and buying mince pies after this because consider my appetite whetted. The 12 days of Christmas were also a time for misrule, a period where societal norms could be inverted. And for example of this, we need to just travel a little bit back in the month to the 6th of December. On this date, a boy bishop would be elected. He was often chosen from the group of choristers who serviced a cathedral. This boy bishop would then perform the ceremonies and offices of the bishop, excluding celebrating the Mass, during the 12 days of Christmas. In particular, he would be doing his job on the 28th of December, which is the Feast of Holy Innocents, also known as Childermass. On the 20th of December, the boy bishop would be dressed up in miniature versions of the real bishop's vestments. They would even be known to preach sermons. For others who hoped to take part and enjoy this experience of inversion, there was also the tradition of selecting a Lord of Misrule. And the Lord of Misrule for the allotted period would be in control of royal courts, noble households, inns of court and even universities. This Lord of Misrule could expect to be paid mock reverence by his feigned court. Now, when there was a Lord of Misrule at the royal court, that feigned court would almost always, I think, include the true king. So what you would witness is the true king paying reverence to the Lord of Misrule. Another Twelfth Night tradition that potentially promised to play into misrule was the habit of baking a marker, whether that was a bean, a coin and or a pea, sometimes all three, into a cake that sounds remarkably similar to what we now know as Christmas cake. Anybody who found a marker in their piece of cake would be named king or queen of the bean or the pea. And for the evening celebration, they would be allowed to take the lead in singing, in dancing, merrymaking, and possibly also pranking. So for those of you who have nearly broken a tooth or almost choked on one of those little silver charms or even a coin that some well-meaning person has secreted away in a piece of Christmas cake, I guess this is the tradition that you can get to thank for that. During this season of misrule and inversion, pranking and gameplay was to be expected, but while there was licence, there were still lines that could not be crossed. So, damage to property, for example, or, certainly at the most serious end of the spectrum, accusations or attempts at treason would absolutely not be overlooked simply because they had occurred during some festive pranking. Put simply, criminality won't be ignored simply because you were joking. Something that's quite different from how we celebrate Christmas is that gifts used to be exchanged on New Year's Day rather than December 25th. When you were giving those gifts at the royal court, however, they were also messages, promises, and sometimes a means of securing preferment. Get your gifting wrong, and even worse, cause offence with it, and the consequences could be dire. No one who's got a mind to their future, and particularly with that future being profitable, is going to be re-gifting last year's bath bombs, or for that matter, speed buying a 7-pack of comedy socks to hand off to their monarch. I did show some examples of New Year's gifts that were given by Elizabeth to both her stepmother, Catherine Parr, and also her father, King Henry VIII. I showed those both in last week's video, and so that's another one that I'm going to leave linked if you want to check them out, because I did also include images of the gifts that she made and then gave. At the end of the festive period came Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night was the traditional time to go a wassailing, and it was also a time to go mumming or mummering. So the former of these, wassailing, may involve a visit to bless the fruit trees of your region, or it could take the form of a trip to your lord and or your neighbours, where you would bring your blessings, good cheer and songs, hoping to exchange them for money, food and or drink. Wassailing is a tradition that precedes Christianity, and it's one that extends on to today because modern carolers are seen as being the contemporary echo of this earlier practice. And I think it's interesting, possibly connected, that the word carol, ending in an E from the past, referred to a kind of dance, performed in a ring or a chain. The participants would usually link hands and they would sing as they danced. So when people would go a wassailing, they might carol through the orchards or through the streets or round to their neighbour's house or through their lord's manor, and so perhaps that's another connection there. That other pre-Christian celebration that made its way into medieval and early modern festivities, also commonly on Twelfth Night, was, as I mentioned, mumming. You might, once again, expect a visit from your neighbours, but this time they are going to be masked or disguised. They're going to be singing, dancing, or acting out a play, and it was frequently something that would be religiously inspired, such as tales of St. George and his heroism. And again, money or some other form of compensation would be expected from the householder who was getting to witness these, no doubt, fabulous entertainments. While many, if not most, of the medieval traditions continued on through the early modern period and beyond, the English Reformation did cause some alterations to certain Christmas customs, in particular to the gameplay around the election of boy bishops, something which had already been challenged before the Reformation, but that was stopped by King Henry VIII. Boy bishops then make a return under Henry's daughter, Mary I, before eventually being banned in England by Mary's half-sister, Elizabeth I. While the ban in Elizabeth's reign certainly would have curtailed the tradition, it clearly doesn't eradicate it completely from the national consciousness. Although, with that being said, I think it's important not to overstate how much this is seen as a part of our English or British tradition, because apart from very few examples, I don't think it is. Nevertheless, Hereford and Salisbury Cathedral do still elect a boy bishop in the present day. Equally, just because some of the opportunity for misrule was closed off in post-Reformation England in this way, we should not take that as evidence that the 12 days of Christmas lost any of their spirit of fun and excess. The inversions, pranks, cross-dressing and confusion of William Shakespeare's Twelfth Night stands as testament to the spirit of the season, I would argue. I mean, there are some who claim that Queen Elizabeth I herself is the one who commissioned Twelfth Night, that she requested a special play for her own court's entertainment that would take place on Twelfth Night 1601, and Shakespeare delivered. And this would be a wonderful story. Unfortunately, for me, it lacks the requisite supporting evidence for me to tell you that that's the way it happened. Nevertheless, in post-Reformation England, what did happen was that people still performed in masques and plays. They still visited their neighbours to sing songs and keep company in return for rewards, be it food, drink or money. The 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany was still a time of feasting, albeit with the inclusion of a brand new meat, turkey, which was being imported at some point during the 1500s, and so the story goes, King Henry VIII was the very first English monarch to have what would eventually become the traditional Christmas turkey. Additionally, it is believed that there was what has been termed a Little Ice Age in the early modern period, and this created a drop in temperature that is used to explain the times where the Thames is recorded to have frozen over solidly. And I say solidly because the ice was secure enough to become a space for merriment itself, with frost fairs and their connected booths being set up on the ice. Some of these periods of the frozen Thames coincided with periods of celebration for Christmas. Nevertheless, there would be a challenge to the traditions that would eventually develop into Christmas as we know it, and that challenge came in the 17th century. It came when King Charles I fell out spectacularly with his parliament, at which point his nation was swiftly placed on a footing to civil war, a civil war that broke out in 1642. And this was a war that the king and his cavaliers would ultimately lose. This loss, coupled with Charles's intransigence, finally resulted in the execution of an anointed king in 1649. I do have a series of videos on this particular event, which I will also be leaving linked. Undeniably, this clearly wasn't great for the king, but it was also really bad news for Christmas. Many of King Charles's opponents in Parliament were Puritans, who, as a faith group, when it came to Christmas, viewed the singing, feasting, pranking, gaming, excess and luxury as a wasteful distraction from the purpose of the season, namely, to spend time in respectful contemplation, preparing for and marking the birth of Christ. In The Anatomy of Abuses, which was first published in 1583, Philip Stubbs complains about, quote, all the wicked games used in Christmas time, and goes on to assert that, quote, the true celebration of the feast of Christmas is to meditate and, as it were, to ruminate in the secret cogitations of our minds upon the incarnation and birth of Jesus Christ, God and man, not only at that time, but all the times and days of our life, to show ourselves thankful to his blessed majesty for the same. Instead of this happening, Stubbs complains of, quote, masking and mumming, whereby robbery, whoredom and sometime murder is committed. What dicing and carding, what eating and drinking, what banqueting and feasting is then used, more than in all the year besides, to the great dishonour of God and the impoverishing of the realm. By the 6th of September 1642, the year that civil war first broke out, London was under the full control of the parliamentarian forces, and on this date, September the 6th, the so-called Long Parliament declared that public stage plays were now unbecoming with these times of humiliation and civil war. Christmastide was a prime time for playing and for the professional players working in the indoor playhouses, the inns and also at court. The ban on playing would become law in 1648. We think that performances still happened, but when they did, they were in contravention of the law, and so they would have to take place in a suitably clandestine fashion. If going to a Christmas panto is part of your Christmas tradition, well, this was the time that that part of your Christmas was under real threat. But the parliamentarians weren't finished there. On the 19th of December 1644, an ordinance was passed that the Christmas period should be treated, quote, with the more solemn humiliation, because it may call to remembrance our sins and the sins of our forefathers, who have turned this feast, pretending the memory of Jesus, into an extreme forgetfulness of him, by giving liberty to carnal and sensual delights. That year, 1644, Christmas was set to fall on the day of a regular, legally ordered fast day. The suggestion or inquiry about whether an exception should be made on account of the season and the day was denied. There was to be no feasting that Christmas. On the 10th of June 1647, another ordinance was passed, this one to abolish Christmas Day as both a feast day and a holiday. Markets were required to remain open. Feasting, singing, dancing and gameplay were all off the table. Instead, the day was to be spent quietly. And if, as in 1644, it also happened to fall upon a fast day, then the food would be austere too. Not very jolly. In fact, there were pro-Christmas riots that took place in response to these measures. But everything was soon to be able to change, because in 1660 Charles I's son took up the invitation to return to sit upon his father's throne and reign as King Charles II, and before long he was being known as the Merry Monarch. The festivities of Christmas, much like the King, were allowed to return, as were the players and their performances. At once, the promise of the future emergence of the Christmas panto as we know and love it was thus returned. After the Stuarts came the Hanoverians, and they continued with the Christmas traditions of excess and enjoyment that had gone before. There was one change, and to me it's a truly Georgian one, because for the Georgians, if something was fun, there should just be more of it. So the full festivities were now to begin on St. Nicholas's Day, which is the 6th of December, and they would still last on until Twelfth Night, or Epiphany, on the 6th of January. The next really big phase of tradition change comes in with the Victorians. That Christmas panto as we now know it, the one that I've been banging on about, the one with the cross-dressed dame and principal boy, who star in shows about Dick Whittington, Peter Pan and Cinderella, to name just a few, is firmly a product of the Victorian era, because this panto performance style is the replacement of the Italian commedia dell'arte form that had gone before, which had originally gained popularity in the 18th century. For the next tradition, we have to look to Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, because he often gets the credit for introducing the Christmas tree to Britain. But in truth, they were over here long before he was. Indeed, the tradition for Christmas trees dates back to at least the 1700s. What Albert, and for that matter Victoria, can certainly claim credit for is popularising the Christmas tree. In 1848, the Illustrated London News publishes this image of the royal family gathered around a decorated Christmas tree. It's lit with candles and it has a selection of gifts at its base. This image is both aspirational and usefully possible to imitate. And imitated it certainly was. You might say that in a relatively short space of time, fashion has become tradition. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of us probably don't do the Christmas tree in quite the same way that Victoria and Albert did, because I reckon that for the majority of us, there's just the one tree per household of people. But for Victoria and Albert, they had one tree each. Then their children had another one to share, as did the servants. The gifts set beneath the tree would be exchanged on Christmas Eve rather than on Christmas Day or indeed on New Year as it had once been. For me, Christmas cards and also Christmas crackers are just such a solid part of my Christmas celebrations, and right now I'm going to say that I recognise that I must thank the Victorians for both of these things. In 1843, Henry Cole had the idea to streamline the process of sending out Christmas wishes. With the help of his friend, the artist John Calcott Halsey, Cole created and then sent an item that gets the credit for being the first Christmas card. Very like today's family photo cards, this creation shows the Cole family making merry. So if you thought that the Kardashians were doing something new, they absolutely aren't. The Cole family are framed with images of charity in action. Cole would commission a printer to print 1,000 copies of his card, some of which he would put on sale for a shilling. A shilling was considered to be a very high price for both the time and the product on sale, and this led to somewhat of a faltering start for the old Christmas card. Nevertheless, Christmas cards would eventually become an absolutely expected part, a staple, if you will, of the festive period. In 1847, so a few years after Henry Cole's first Christmas card, Tom Smith patents the Christmas cracker. It would take him until the 1860s to perfect the cracker's famous explosive pop, and to do so, 2 strips of paper were employed. On one strip, silver fulminate is painted on one side. On the other strip, there is a side with an abrasive surface, something like a sandpaper, so that when the cracker is pulled, the friction between these coated paper surfaces creates a small explosion, which sounds scarier than it is. I did some checking, and from what I can tell, I believe that all, maybe most modern crackers still work in exactly the same way, using exactly the same chemicals. Crackers today include hats and prizes, and that is an addition that's made by Walter Smith, who is Tom's son. By the 1890s, these crackers are so popular that manufacturing has to move to larger premises, this time in Finsbury Square. And by the 1890s, the company is employing 2,000 people, many of them apparently women. In the next century, in the first decades, jokes get added to the crackers. Today, Christmas dinners all across the land are still accompanied by the telltale bang or snap of the cracker. Then comes the rustle of the Christmas party hat going on, followed by the occasional ooh or ah when a particularly fun prize drops out. And lastly, there is the oh so necessary groan at the telling of the terrible joke. And in my experience, they are always terrible, but they are also contained within the Christmas cracker. Other cracker companies have, of course, come onto the market, but Tom Smith continues to trade, and they do so by royal appointment, no less. So, if you were to be so minded, you could pull your own cracker this Christmas, and it would be made by the very same company whose crackers will also be being pulled by the royal household at their retreat at Sandringham. And it's also said that Her Majesty the Queen uses Tom Smith's wrapping paper for her presents. Another key shared experience regarding the traditions, or maybe magic, of Christmas, I would argue, is an aspirational one. Because I think that many of us share an image of an ideal Christmas, and like Bing Crosby, we are dreaming of a white Christmas. And that white Christmas is the one we find on the Christmas card. It's the one with really strong echoes of the historical past, specifically, I'd say, the Victorian past. We've all seen it. A group of carolers standing in the clean, crisp white snow, and they're beneath one of those old-style gas street lamps. There's lots of tartan on show, and there will usually be a very sweet, ruddy-cheeked little girl with masses of glossy ringlets who's there warming her hands in a fur-lined muff that perfectly matches her very smart coat. This is a Victorian Christmas, yes, but it is one that's framed for us by Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol, which was written in 1843. Dickens' biographer, Peter Ackroyd, explains that, quote, "In view of the fact that Dickens can be said to have almost single-handedly created the modern idea of Christmas, it is interesting to note that, in fact, during the first 8 years of his life, there was a white Christmas every year. So sometimes, does reality actually exist before the idealised image? So might it be that our idealised Christmas, the one that is heavily inspired by the Victorian period, the one that we put in our Christmas cards, the one that we feel has been preserved for us by that famous adult Victorian author Charles Dickens, may have far less to do with his experience as an adult, far less to do with a real Victorian past, and much more in common with his impression, his joy at experiencing Christmas as a Georgian child. And I wonder if there's potentially some comfort in that, particularly for those of us who can find ourselves feeling a sense of disappointment if or when our Christmases don't quite match up to that benchmark that we are striving for. Because in trying to create that magic, if we spend all of our time thinking about the adult Dickens and his framing of Victorian Christmas, we lose the sense of it. Because the magic isn't through adult eyes, is it? It's through the eyes of a child. But what do you think about Christmas traditions from the past? About our own aspirations for Christmas perfection? Is there any now forgotten tradition, or indeed traditions, that you would like to see return? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so do follow me over on some or all of them so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then why not share it with some friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, and beside the subscribe button is a bell icon. If you hit that and then select all in the drop down, then YouTube will tell you when I next upload. As I said at the start, I do hope that I'm going to be able to figure out how to do a YouTube live in a more organised manner than I did achieve with my first attempt, which happened I think back in 2020. And if I can, then I'm going to get the chance to talk with all of you before 2022. However, if for whatever reason we do only end up meeting again in the new year, then I do hope that whether you celebrate or not, that you will all have a safe, restful and very happy holiday. And I also hope that the new year will bring you nothing but good things. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.